Uliana, one could say, was lucky. The management of the orphanage, where she had been living since she was 10 years old, managed to place its pupils in a queue of thousands to receive orphan certificates. And then, when Ulya was 21 years old and had graduated from the College of Commerce and Economics, she got a message that the waiting list she'd been on since she was 14 was finally up. The girl walked around the city and dreamily looked around at other people's houses, yards, and the nearest bus stops. She, of course, wanted to live closer to the center, but their apartments were much more expensive, so she decided to look in the bedroom communities. In the list of advertisements, she liked a small 2-floor apartment on the 2nd floor in a new building. The house had recently been commissioned, and the owner of the apartment said that he had not even moved in. Strange, thought Ulya. Well, what could make a person sell a brand new apartment, and even so inexpensively? Upon entering the apartment, Uliana immediately smelled the odor of new building materials and uninhabited housing. She followed the owner into the kitchen, then into the room separated by a short, wide corridor. She liked the layout very much. The communal bathroom was a bit cramped, but for Ulya its very existence was an incredible luxury. In the dormitories where she had lived in recent years, there was only one toilet per floor, and the so-called bathtubs never had water. Finally, the co-owner of the apartment, who introduced himself as Anton, looked perplexedly at the buyer. "Well, will you take it?" Ulya once again looked around and asked, "Can I think about it? Can I think about it?" "Yes, please." "Yes," hiding his irritation, replies the landlord, "but I warned you that the apartment is being sold urgently, so do not delay." "Why are you selling it?" Ulya couldn't resist. The owner looked at her with such sad brown eyes that her heart ached. "I got involved in this shared construction for the sake of my mother. She didn't get along with my ex-wife. There's always scandals at home, so I decided to buy my mom a separate apartment. But the construction took too long, running through the courts. All this nervousness brought my mother to a heart attack. She became ill, and my wife didn't want to look after her and filed for divorce. I took care of my mom for 2 years, then she died. So I don't need this apartment now." "Why are you in such a hurry?" Anton hesitated. "I've seen a good car for myself. Only the other day they brought it, and already there is a queue of buyers. So she needs the money urgently. Ulya warned me. Keep in mind, I am going to buy the apartment, but also the orphan certificate. It will take a little longer than in a normal transaction, but I'll get the cash," Anton clarified. "Of course, it's only in the bank." He waved his hand. "All right, whatever happens, you think." Ulya left him her phone number and said goodbye. She went to 2 more addresses and realized that Anton's apartment was beating the competition. One place offered a place with rotten water pipes. In another they said that the radiators did not warm up at all in winter. As a result, the same evening Ulya called Anton and agreed to meet at the bank. In the evening he was much more polite, and before saying goodbye, Anton suddenly called her by name. "Ulya, forgive me for an indelicate question, but where did you get a certificate for housing? You really are an orphan?" She answered briefly, matter-of-factly, and hung up. Anton arrived in all white, summer pants, tennis shoes, and sneakers. His hair was slicked back and he wore sunglasses on his nose, macho and nothing but macho. Ulya hardly recognized him. "Hello," she smiled and extended her hand to him. "I didn't recognize him. Will you be rich?" "Thank you, Ulya. But I don't believe in omens." He grinned. After staying in the bank for about 2 hours, they finally went outside. Anton squared his shoulders and suggested, "Well, shall we have a bite to eat somewhere?" And while Uliana was considering his proposal, he dialed the number of a cab. "Where are we going?" she asked, getting into a Renault with a yellow stripe and checkers on the side. "Oh, there's a place you like," he promised. "All really like the roadside cafe motel." The place was very picturesque. On a hillside overlooking the lake, there was a wide balcony on the 2nd floor of the building with room doors opening onto it. "How did you know about this cafe?" Ulya asked, looking from the open terrace at the blue surface of the lake. All truckers know it, Anton smiled. Here you can eat good food, take a shower, wash, sleep. I don't spend the night here, it is close to home. But I come here for a snack all the time. So you a trucker? She asked. Yeah, while my mother was ill and not working, I had to register a nursing pension. A year ago, I am back on the road, and I am about to go on a trip. I've always dreamed of the long haul, always driving. She suddenly remembered something and asked me, why do you need an expensive passenger car if you drive all the time? And this is for special trips. Anton said admonitively and grinned. Do you want me to drive you first? Do not be embarrassed. We have long ago time to go to you. Ulya blushed slightly. Well, I would prefer to ride in a truck. So what? Asked the question. Let us finish with the apartment and go on a trip. No, I can't. I already got a job. Uliana replied regretfully. Oh, you little sparrow, sighed Anton. And what, do you have no one at all? Slowly asked. Only an old grandfather in the village was. Last year he was buried, so I did not take him to the city, as I dreamed. Anton put his arm around Yulia's shoulders. My poor little sparrow, let us go home. He drove her to the dormitory, and they said goodbye until Monday, when the bank promised to make a decision on the allocation of funds. Ulya, who had never been hugged or called in such a gentle voice since she was 10 years old, completely melted at the affectionate treatment. As a child, she lived with her parents in a small house. Her mother and father were geologists and often went on expeditions in the summer. At that time she was sent to her grandfather in the village. When her parents died in the mountains, Ulya found herself in a boarding school for orphans. In Anton she found a friend, a father, and someone else, whom the girl was afraid to even think about. Anton, on the contrary, confidently drew closer to the new acquaintance. He even invited her to a meeting with his trucker friends and introduced her as his girlfriend. When she raised her surprised look at him, he cheerfully winked, and after the meeting apologizing tone said, Do not worry, Sparrow, I have to you, really, serious intentions. I want to marry you. Ulya, who only knew about male-female relationships from library books, realized that there was something missing in their communication, but she kept silent and just waited. And finally she waited. Anton came to her in a brand new car with a bouquet of roses, confessed his love, and gave her a ring. A month later there was a noisy wedding. Riding around the city, photo shoots. Ulya's friends were having a lot of fun and winked at the young truckers. Everything that was happening seemed like a marvelous dream to her. Uliana moved in with Anton, and they sold their new apartment to buy a garage for the car and go on a luxurious wedding trip. She felt kissed by fate. I lived in a 2-room apartment in a good neighborhood, worked in a bank as an accountant. She saw her husband off on his trips, looked forward to them and welcomed them with joy. She was also happy to receive guests, her husband's colleagues with their wives and children. 10 months later, she became a mother herself, which only added to the reasons for the feast. But Ulya was not burdened by them because she grew up in a large team. Anton adored his firstborn, carried him when he came from flights, spoiled him with gifts. When the baby was a year old, again rolled a noisy holiday, and in the evening Ulya whispered to her husband that she was pregnant again. That's good, cheerfully echoed Anton. From one maternity leave immediately go to another. But from the second maternity leave, Ulya almost immediately went to the third. Anton, sitting in his favorite cafe motel with his buddies, complained, I just don't know what to do. I am hardly ever at home. I hardly ever spend the night with my wife, and if I spend the night, she is pregnant. The man clapped the father of many children on the shoulder and consoled him. Well, but when they grow up, you will have a whole team of helpers. 3 sons, it as a gift. However, Anton did not think so. Coming home, he immediately tired of the children as crying, pots, diapers, piles of laundry and bottles with nipples. Preoccupied with the children, Ulya pushed her husband to the furthest reaches of her mind, and he felt undeservedly oppressed in his own home. One day on the way back, he stopped by his favorite cafe and met an old acquaintance, with whom he tried to have an affair in his youth. She, recognizing Anton, scattered in compliments. "Is that you, Antoha? How you have grown up and looked so handsome." Carelessly chatting with her, he said that at home he is waiting for noisy children and an eternally busy wife. And he terribly won. Ulya did not wait for her husband from the flight and started calling his colleagues. As Anton's phone was switched off, his friends claimed that he was about to come home, but he never did. In the morning, he called his wife and as if nothing had happened. "Hive, I am sorry. I had a breakdown, so I had to spend the night in a motel. And now we got apart on the way, so I'll be home soon." Why his phone was turned off, the husband didn't explain. After staying at home until dinner, Anton went somewhere else again. "Where are you going?" Ulya asked. "I have to go to a place on business. Don't wait for me. Have a rest." Uliana saw through the window as her husband drove out of the garage of his Halen car and drove to the central street. When Anton's incomprehensible departures became regular, she realized her husband has another. It could not be otherwise, because at home her amorous husband slept only on the couch, separately from his wife. One day she couldn't take it anymore. She called a friend and asked her to babysit. She called a cab and drove to the motel, and the car was here. She mumbled as she looked at the parking lot. She asked the cab driver to wait and went up to the second floor. Most of the rooms were silent. Only one had muffled music and discreet female laughter. Ulya knocked decisively. Inside there was silence. Then her husband asked who was there. Ulya shouted in a low voice, "Isn't your car on fire in the parking lot?" The husband in his bathing trunks jumped out of the room and rushed downstairs like a scalded man without even looking at Uliana. His companion, a blonde woman in lingerie, rushed to the window that overlooked the parking lot. "What kind of joke is this?" She shouted angrily at Ulya, but she was already racing toward her cab. She almost ran into her husband in the parking lot. He stared at her and, barely realizing what was happening, ran after her, but the cab driver, driven by Ulya, accelerated sharply. When she got home, she was shaking. A friend offered to drink a sedative, but Ulya silently took out her suitcases and began to fold. "Ulyan, are you crazy? Where are you going at night?" "At the station there is a room for mothers and children," the woman said indifferently. Younger children in the stroller took the eldest in her arms and left the apartment. Her friend helped her get to the train station, get settled in a hotel and buy a ticket for the early train. In the morning, she arrived to put her desperate friend on the train. "Tell me where you are going," she asked, saying goodbye. "Grandpa's house. It is my legal estate now." The news that his granddaughter and 3 children had moved into Vasily Ivanovich's house quickly spread through the village. The chairman of the village council was the first to visit the new resident. He promised to help in any way he could, for example, to get his sons into kindergarten. There were only 2 groups in the village garden, the younger one for kids from 1.5 to 3 and the older one from 3 to 7. So all of Uliana's children were accepted into the older group. She herself wanted to get a job as an accountant, but this position in the office was already taken. So she had to accept the only vacancy, machine milking operator. When her boarding school went to the countryside, the girls were taken to the farm and taught to milk cows. Therefore, Uliana had an idea of the profession. A significant disadvantage in the work was that you had to come to the morning milking at 5 o'clock in the morning and to the evening milking at 7 in the evening. At that time, the children were not in daycare. Fortunately, a neighbor, a former teacher, a pensioner and Dasha offered to help and began to come to her sons. When their mother went to milking. Aunt Dasha knew a huge of fairy tales, children as songs and poems. That is why the boys loved her and called her grandmother. One evening, when Uliana was coming from the evening milking, a car slowed down next to her. The window opened and she heard, "Sparrow, is that you?" Uliana shuddered. "Anton." He got out of the car and looked at her with sad, dark brown eyes. "Just don't send me away, Ulchka." He covered his face with his hands and burst into tears. "At last I have found you. I was almost lost without you." He struggled to catch his breath. When I got home and saw that you and the kids were gone, it was like an electric shock. What did I do? What did I do? I was so drunk with grief that day. Good thing the guys covered for me in front of the bosses. Then I took a leave of absence and started looking for you. Lena, of course, denied it, saying, I don't know, I want to tell you. I pissed her off so much that she called the police, and I was put away for 15 days so that I wouldn't get violent. I came out, got drunk again. I got drunk again. I went to Lena S again, and she went for the phone. I freaked out, rolled the car out. I thought I'd kill myself on it and that acid. I didn't kill myself, but I almost killed the car, and I had to pay the fine for 6 months. Anyway, I had to rent the truck later. He was afraid to drive himself. He got a job as a janitor at a kindergarten, but there I almost died of boredom. In the morning, they bring the kids in, and I am like a wolf howling. I suffered for a year. In the end, I came to Lanka sober, serious, and fell at her feet, begging her to give me your address. She took pity. She told me that you work as a milkmaid and that our children go to the garden. And I swore to her that if you forgave me, I wouldn't take a drop in my mouth again. And I'd be reinstated at work. And I'd love only you. Anton again covered his face with his palms. His shoulders shook with crying. From the former cheerful trucker, who made Ulya's head spin, was gone. She looked at his short cropped hair, his swarthy arms, and bent back, and her heart ached. Why hadn't he rushed after her then? Why hadn't he stopped her? Why hadn't he talked her out of it? She deep into hurt to forgive, though, and now she felt unbearably sorry for this man crushed by fate, the father of her children, who didn't even remember him. Uliana leaned against the car. Maybe you should work in our village as a chauffeur, she asked. The house is grandfather-s and good, warm. The children like it in the village, and they have a grandmother here. I don't know if they want to live in an apartment. So you Ray not angry with me? Anton asked hopefully. What do you mean? How angry? Uliana answered seriously. I don't know how you Ray gonna look your kids in the eye. And do they even need such a father? They do, Uleka. Of course boys need a father. I am not the worst man, believe me, even though I offended you. But I didn't want to leave my family. Forgive me, you fool. Ulya hugged Anton's head, kissed him on the vertex and said, Oh, you Toa, the poor bastard. Okay, let us go. We'll get reacquainted with the children. They began to live together in the village. Away from the bustle and temptations of the city, they worked at the state farm, kept a small homestead. The sons, to their father's delight, they grew up to be hard-working, smart kids. They ran to help him and shared their school stories. Several times a year Ulya went to the cemetery to visit her grandfather. She installed a granite monument with his photo on his grave, planted flowers inside the tomb. Her parents' graves did not exist, as their bodies could not be pulled out of the tight mountain cleft. One day, approaching her grandfather's grave, Ulya noticed at the monument a strange figure, completely gray-haired. A slouching man was sitting on a bench and muttering something. She approached, called out to the stranger. He turned around, and Ulya was stunned. In front of her was an exact copy of her grandfather. He looked into her eyes and suddenly asked Uleka, Is that you? Yes, and you. My God, shouted Grandpa, turning to the monument. Daddy, she has found her. He jumped, his lips trembled. I am your father, Ulya. Have you forgotten me too? I can't be. You and Mom died. Yeah, she fell first. I fell next, and maybe that killed her and saved me. I was unconscious for a long time, cold and here. Didn't he know what was going on up there? They must have stopped looking for us, because when I woke up, it was silent. I tried to get up, but I didn't have enough strength. After lying down a little longer, I stood on the ledge at full height, leaned my arms and legs against the walls of the crevice, and slowly made my way to the top. After climbing out, I lost consciousness again and woke up in a hovel. Elderly mountaineers found me and started nursing me back to health. They spoke in an unfamiliar language, asking me something I did not understand. Frankly speaking, I did not even remember who I was and why I was there. But they brought me some documents that I carried in my breast pocket, and then my memory began to clear up. I remembered that my wife was with me and I cried bitterly then. The old man didn't he know how to comfort me, and I didn't he know how to show them that she was still lying there in the crevice. When I was well enough, I made it my goal to get to that place, to find your mother or her body. I already spoke a little of the mountaineers' language, so they helped me get to that very mountain. I don't know how many attempts I made to go down the dip and find her, but it was all in vain. The body was nowhere to be seen, so I decided to get to the capital, organize a search operation. It wasn't easy. It required a lot of money, and I didn't have any. I moved to a more settled village, got a job and tried to save some money. I couldn't get in touch with my colleagues. My phone had fallen down in the ravine and my address book had disappeared, and I could not remember numbers and addresses from memory. Several years passed like that. I finally managed to get to the capital, but they wouldn't even talk to me in the department. They took me for a madman and even called an ambulance, which took me to a mental hospital. But I don't even want to remember this part of my life. I wonder how they didn't erase my memory with their medication. Then I stopped demanding to be recognized as normal and left alone. They kept me a little longer and discharged me. What was I supposed to do? I went to my father's village. The house was boarded up, and the neighbors said my grandfather was buried. Nobody in the village recognized me. He didn't want to tell me my name. Last they put me back in the asylum. I took an empty house in a neighboring village. I went to work as a watchman, and when I had a lot of money to scrape together, I went to the city to our small house. Only our room was occupied by other people. I asked where the girl Ulya was. They shrugged their shoulders. They said you live in a college dormitory. I went there and they said you got your diploma and got married. I thought I'd find your friends, but I don't know anybody. There are a lot of colleges on the list, so I came back to the village with nothing. I come here often. I tell my father about my troubles. Ulya listened to her father and wiped away her tears. When he stopped talking, she rushed to him, hugged him around the neck and pressed herself against his chest. Daddy, Daddy, how happy we are with you. Let us go home. You have 3 grandchildren, and you are wandering around in foreign villages. Father splashed his hands. 3, well, Uliana, well done. It is not for nothing that I was drawn to the cemetery today. I thought it was the end, but it turned out to be the beginning. Come on, let us go. He took her hand, just like when I was a kid, and they followed the path through the meadow to Grandpa's house, where a large, close-knit family was waiting for them. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked the story, I hope for your support with a thumbs up button. All the best!